crowd equals livid. That's what I've got in my notes.
I thought that the only way that Pax could have been moving any quicker sideways is if he had turned around and ran.
Oh, no doubt. He created the contact and was completely out of position, but I'm just saying my total Bulls bias, I've even reworded it so that it's an out-of-control hot rod is what I've written down.
As a fellow long-time Bulls fan, I'm actually jealous I didn't come up with that.
Out-of-control hot rod. I'll take that.
Then you are in Australia right now.
You're talking NBA basketball. You're talking great teams. You're talking great individual players.
Takes it off, and there's number 23, and of course Johnny goes nuts.
We're all getting goosebumps thinking about it now.
I just tried to go out there and play my game.
I have no idea what you're talking about, Adam. I don't like anybody. I'm not a people person.
Strand, you made the pass, yes. Christian, can you catch the ball? Yes.
All the stars were aligned and all the muscles fired at the right time, and I was able to get off the ground and throw one down.
I was saving that as a surprise for you.
And now, introducing your host for In All Airness, Adam Ryan.
I'd like to welcome back to the show today, good friend, Aaron Steen. How are you, Aaron?
Adam, good to be back, mate.
Good to have you, and thanks for coming back on again. Now, today we're going to be chatting about some of Michael Jordan's greatest games, and our first selection that we've picked from the vault is March 28th, 1990. It's Chicago at Cleveland in a game for the ages, MJ's highest scoring game, his 69-point performance. So should be plenty of things for us to break down here and talk about in this wonderful game.
I'm pretty sure that one of our listeners out there who is more familiar with the area can clear this up. Pretty sure the Richfield Coliseum was out in the middle of a paddock because there were several shots that I saw of the stadium, and I swear to God, I saw sheep in the foreground of the shot. Now, that may or may not be correct, but I'm sure that someone can clear it up for us.
I'm trying to think of some sort of joke to go along with that, but I just don't have one. So
only because they were playing in Ohio and not New Zealand.
I've never really actually seen the sheep, but
You've never seen the sheep.
No, I said the sheep, as in the Richfield Coliseum sheep.
Yeah.
I didn't know I'd be saying the phrase the Richfield Coliseum sheep 2 minutes ago. So thanks for bringing it up. That's awesome.
That's okay. No, I saw highlights of it was on NBA Action or like a post-game show, and it was a Bulls at Cleveland game, and they had a shot of the stadium, and I swear there was sheep in the foreground. So it was either in amongst some paddocks or it was in a paddock. But I've actually heard that it's quite a fair way out from the other city of Cleveland itself.
Okay. Now, you're probably right because I've just put a Google search in for Richfield Coliseum. I've had a quick image search, and there's some interesting images coming up. It looks like it's in a wide open spot. It looks like there could well be some pastures around the place. So
and sheep.
Yeah, can't confirm nor deny the presence of sheep, but I'm sure they exist. So, welcome to the In All Farming podcast. But anyhow, right. So, the game that we'll be talking about today, mate, is the TNT telecast, and it's included on the Ultimate Jordan box set of DVDs. That starts off with a great TNT intro as well, where it shows all the star players of that era from 1990 with the iconic buildings in the background or landmarks, and they've been superimposed behind the players. So you've got a whole great collection of players with some of the key landmarks from their respective cities in the background. One of the great openings of all time.
Yeah, very cool intro to the old NBA games on TNT, and you also had them on CBS as well. Very cool intros back in the 80s and 90s, and the commentary duo of that game being Bob Neal and Doug Collins, also one of the other great duos of that time. Another TNT guy that was a great pairing up with Doug Collins was Ron Thulin, who I thought was an excellent commentator, but I think you could pretty much pair anyone up with Doug Collins. I thought he was an excellent analyst.
Yeah, he was fantastic. And Ron Thulin is one of my favourite commentators of all time. So I loved hearing him. He had a really good enthusiasm for the game. And he used to then do local network coverage as well for the San Antonio Spurs. And he used to be the local guy for the Spurs telecast in the mid to late, or the mid-90s at least. So pretty cool to hear him as well. Now, this game, heading into this game, the Bulls were 45-23 and Cleveland were just below 500. They were 32-36. There also was a very interesting article in the newspaper on the day of this particular game, which perhaps could have been the impetus for Jordan's explosion as well. The article was titled "Mission Impossible: ELO to try and ground Air Jordan. And in that article, MJ was quoted as saying, and this is one of his probably many mind games he did throughout his whole career, he was quoted as saying, Craig ELO is a very good defender and I accept it as a challenge. So that's pretty much getting himself revved up for the game, and we obviously know what he'd go on to do. So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
And ELO at 6'7" was a good size to guard Jordan. It was just unfortunate that the guy that he was trying to guard was Michael Jordan. Like, ELO had a pretty rough game as well. We won't spoil it, we won't spoil the ending of the game, but he started off the game shooting the ball very poorly. He had 69 points dropped on him by MJ, and he also got elbowed in the head by teammate Larry Nance at one point in time during the game, so a bit of a rough one.
He was ST ruggling a little bit there, but he ended up with some pretty decent numbers by the end of the game, but his field goals were, I think he was like 10 of 23 or something like that, so he struggled a bit, but still got a fair few points in the end. And when this game happened, the Bulls were on a 6-game road winning streak, so they were going to hopefully tie their then franchise record of 7 straight road wins as well. So there was plenty of things that were happening in the lead up to the game.
One thing that I found humorous before the other start of the game, in the pre-game, Doug Collins is talking about the other Cavs' strategy for the game, and as much as I thought he was a great analyst, his strategy was that the Cavs should, and I quote, get the ball out of Michael's hands, which was, you might want to say, stating the other bleeding obvious, but Doug Collins is analysis was so good, I think, after having been just fresh out of a coaching role with the Bulls. And there were several times in games, and even like during this game, where I think he recalled some plays that he obviously had scouted on the opposing teams, and he'd often pull those plays out in games while he was analysing them. Late in the fourth quarter, he spoke about the Cavs running Mark Price off 4 different screens in order to get him an open shot. It didn't happen on that play, but it happened during the overtime period. That exact same play, and I think that was part of the charm of having Doug Collins as a colour guy on TV.
Yeah, it was really interesting as well because he'd just come off being the coach of the Bulls for best part of 3 seasons. So he just finished his tenure as Bulls coach, and he's now in a position where he's calling the games for TNT. So he's in a really interesting position there, knowing the players intricately. So, and you're right, he would call certain players, and sure enough, more often than not, they would happen. So he had an incredible basketball mind, obviously just coming off his coaching days, and then would obviously go back on to coach again in the future. But yeah, had a great tendency to call these players as they pretty much were about to happen. So you're spot on there. Let's just get into the breakdown of the game. In the first quarter, to start the game, Jordan immediately posts up Winston Bennett, who, after doing a bit of research on Basketball Reference, his nickname is Steady B. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Steady B. But Jordan immediately posts up Winston Bennett and hits a fadeaway towards the Bulls bench, and that's his first 2 points of the game. It was a really tough shot, off balance, and probably a sign of things to come, I suppose, when you look back on things, but an ominous start there. And Winston Bennett, who was, at that particular time at least, he was more of a physical defender on Jordan, or so they were saying during the telecast. He started off on MJ instead of Craig ELO, so that was an interesting switch to begin things from the jump ball.
And having guys like Winston Easy B, Bennett.
Steady B.
Steady B.
Steady
there we go.
B, like B-double-E.
It was a minute later, and I'd completely forgotten what it was. Craig ELO, Mark Price, and Steve Kerr, the last 2 guys, probably a bit undersized, but to have those 4 in particular guarding MJ during this game is probably pretty good indicator as to why he had the offensive game that he had, because those guys, I think, even combined, are going to struggle to check MJ.
And of course, another important thing to take into account here, Ron Harper was with the Cavs, but he'd since been moved on to the LA Clippers. That made it more of a difficult assignment for the Cavaliers because they were struggling as the season had progressed as well. They were playing at under 500 ball at this stage. They would go on to make the playoffs, but in a 7th seed. So they obviously missed the long reach of Ronnie Harper and, of course, his great athletic ability at that stage of his career too. His profile page on basketballreference.com, it says that on the 16th of November 89, he was traded to the Clippers for Danny Ferry and Reggie Williams. So the Cavs actually dealt him, although he was injury affected as well. His 89-90 season, he only played 35 games total.
It can't have been too long after he went over to the Clippers that he did his knee. So that trade, I think, speaks volumes about how the Cavs, how they felt about Craig Elo as well. I think they mentioned during the broadcast that Elo was now making over $1 million a year now, and it obviously put in a lot of hard work. So the Cavs obviously thought that Hart was expendable.
Yep, true. So Harper played 7 games with the Cavs, and then he was dealt to the Clippers. And then he'd only played 28 games, so that's when he obviously had his severe knee injury. And he was averaging 21 points a game, about 5 rebounds and 4 assists, and even 2 steals as well. So he's having some great numbers, but unfortunately his career was obviously halted with that terrible injury. If it was 2013 when this is happening, he's probably back into things a lot quicker. He wouldn't have been as affected as he was, given this was a good 23 years ago.
It's strange that they traded him because he was known as the poor man's Michael Jordan. He was a very spectacular player and always had really good numbers, especially offensively. So it's kind of surprising that they traded him.
Yep. Now, also, I noticed in this first quarter, Jordan's first steal was very similar to his famous thievery against Karl Malone from the 98 finals in Game 6.
He just raked it away from Brad Daugherty.
Yeah, he snuck up on Brad Daugherty and just perfectly timed it, stole it away. Daugherty almost fell to the floor in very similar fashion to Malone as well and had no idea that the play was even unfolding as it happened. So that was quite a eerie similarity there. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
MJ used his monster hands to literally rip the ball away from Brad, didn't he, on that play?
Yeah, he did for sure.
The rest of the first quarter in general was, I thought, pretty sloppy. There was a truckload of turnovers, especially Cleveland in particular were really sloppy with the ball and made guys like Stacey King and Will Perdue look like Defensive Player of the Year candidates. It was pretty ugly. Jordan
was a fiend on the backboards throughout the game. He was getting a lot of rebounds, set a career high in rebounds for that particular game. He scored on a putback from an offensive board to get his second basket. Then later on in the quarter as well, he faked on the 3, then drove and hit another fadeaway off 1 foot, 6 points. So incredible first quarter. Hit on a 3-point shot as well, off an offensive board that was kicked back out to him as well. So he just did it all in that quarter and even came off the weak side, came off 2 screens and was freed up for an 18-footer as well. So he finished the quarter with 16 of the Bulls' 27 points, and they took a 1-point lead into the second quarter.
MJ at that point was leading the NBA in scoring, obviously, at 33 points per game, but he was also averaging about 44 a game versus the other Cavs that year, so scoring 16 in the first quarter. The Cavs faithful at Ridgefield, almost at Gund Arena, at Ridgefield must have suspected that there was something on the way.
That's right, because after 1 quarter, he was already halfway pretty much to his scoring average, and in that 90 season, he led the league in scoring. He had 33.6 points a game, so in this particular contest, he actually doubled that and then some, which is just staggering, really, when you think about it. Heading into the second quarter, Mark Price was playing a good game for the Cavs. He was one of my favourite players back in the day, so he was having a really good game, and he was really annoying John Paxson as well. Like, there'd be numerous times throughout the game where he'd body up against Paxson and make some dubious foul calls get called on him as well, which in the end, Paxson fouled out late in the fourth quarter, so he was obviously getting under the skin of Johnny Pax too.
Yeah, John Paxson complained literally after every foul call that he had on him. Some were justified as you mentioned, Mark Price was jumping into him and getting a block foul called on Pax, which was driving Pax a bit nuts, I think, because I was actually waiting for him to snot one of the refs. But the Cavs at that time on that team had 2 of the more underrated superstars, and that term is used loosely a lot these days, being superstars, but they had 2 underrated superstars on that team in Mark Price and Brad Daugherty. They had a lot of issues that year with injury. Daugherty had only just recently come back from an injury, and there was a very good reason why after this season they started to try to challenge the Bulls for a top spot in the East for a few years.
Yeah, very true. Now, Brad Daugherty, one of the more underrated players in NBA history.
Great.
Obviously, his career was riddled by injuries in the end, unfortunately. He was a 5-time All-Star from memory, so I'm just checking his page now to make sure I'm right, but I'm pretty sure he was 5 times. He was 88, 89, 91, 92, and 93 All-Stars.
There you go, 5 times.
Yeah, so he only missed the 1990 All-Star game in a streak from 88 through to 93, so due to those injuries, unfortunately, his career was limited. So one of the more underrated players going around, a big key for the Cavaliers during that particular era. And Mark Price had a great three-point play in that second quarter where he got the contact from Bill Cartwright and then hit a really tough fading out-of-bounds 12-footer, and then that led to the three-point play. So Mark Price kept him in the game. Jordan continued his scoring barrage. He'd finished the first half with 31 points, and there was only 3 other Bulls who had 5 points each. The only other high scorers for the Bulls at that stage. But Jordan was just incredible in that first half. A random note for no apparent reason. Did you see during the telecast, they came back from an ad break and they were showing one of the Moscow Circus guys who had a bear on his head?
Yeah. That was late 80s, early 90s halftime entertainment at its finest.
And the bear was wearing a Larry Nance jersey.
Yeah. Yeah.
Usually you feel like a bear with a sore head, but this guy actually felt like a guy with a sore head.
I wonder with the Larry Nance jersey on if maybe it was a bit of a poking fun at Larry. Maybe he's an incredibly hairy man.
I think it was just too much to bear, so they took him off the court eventually. Jordan continued his scoring barrage, as we said. He was triple teamed, made a layup and +1 as well. He also got fouled on a drive to the hoop and made a couple of free throws. It was interesting to note as well, during that quarter, Bob Neal suggested that MJ's teammates might become involved offensively in 1994. He must have been a mind reader because it only would be 1994 when Jordan had retired that the Bulls teammates fully became involved in the offense because obviously Jordan was around. So I found that quite amusing. Probably I was the only one though, perhaps.
Bob Neal's humour during games is part of what made him such a great commentator. He also had another quip during the game when Scottie Pippen blew past Chucky Brown out at the three-point line and dunked the ball. He said that Pippen went around Brown like he was nailed to the floor. It was all part of what was so great about Bob Neal.
Yeah, loved his commentary. He is great. Then later in the quarter, MJ got double-teamed out near the three-point line and had a beautiful give-and-go with rookie Stacey King as well. So that led to Jordan's 24th and 25th points. Later on in the quarter as well, Pippen had a steal and then MJ was under the basket, got fouled, made 2 more free throws. I've got on my notes here, Jordan effectively offered up a heat check and had a jab step and hit a long 2 for 29 points. So obviously at this stage, I'm just overanalyzing to the zenith. His final score of the quarter would be a drive into the lane, and he hit a really high-arcing shot that Robert Parrish would have been proud of, and that gave him his 31 points for the first half.
And so many of the baskets that he made during this game were all net. That last one you mentioned, the other rainbow, hit nothing but the bottom of the net. The understatement of the podcast, when a guy finishes with 69 points, 18 rebounds, including, you mentioned before, he was a demon on the offensive boards. He had 7 offensive rebounds that game, 6 assists, 4 steals, and only 2 turnovers in about 50 minutes. He was playing the game like he was playing against high school kids. It was amazing how much further above the rest of the players on the court that he was, his skill level and the way that he was making shots. It was an amazing thing to watch.
Yeah, it was outstanding. He even sold popcorn at halftime and also had a partridge in a pear tree, but it didn't get credited on the stat sheet. Now, by the end of the second quarter, Mark Price had 16 points and Craig Yellow had 11 points. At halftime, these are Jordan's numbers. He had 31 points, 7 boards and 3 steals on 11 of 15 from the field. I haven't used the word otherworldly for a while. It was one of my go-tos back in some earlier episodes, mate, but I'm going to bring out otherworldly.
Welcome back.
That's right, it's back in town. The Bulls had the lead at the half. It was 53-50, and I guess the Cavs head back into the locker room and try and work out a way they can try and minimise what Jordan was doing, but you pretty much knew at this stage you'd be going for 50+. It's just one of those games where nothing would go wrong as far as MJ was concerned. But I think one of the worries was Jordan hadn't quite got to the point where he fully trusted his teammates, and you could still see a young Horace Grant and young Scottie Pippen still trying to develop their games a bit and get to that next stage where Jordan really began to trust them. Again, it would be the following season where they'd win their first title. So they were still just coming together into that great starting unit.
Yeah, you're right. Scotty and Horace were very tentative during that game. Well, Horace had a pretty good game offensively, but the Bulls bench in that game went 5 for 15 from the field. And I think that was a mixture of being tentative, not having too many shots left because MJ was jacking them all up, and the fact that they were probably all sitting around watching MJ as he scored 69. So, yeah, 5 for 15 from the Bulls bench in that game.
Yep. And we also should note that Craig Hodges didn't play in this game. He was on the injured list for the Bulls at this stage. The Bulls had just recently signed Clifford Lett to a 10-day contract. He was playing in the place of an injured Craig Hodges. And on this same night, Clifford Lett was named the CBA Rookie of the Year. My research has led me to find out. He averaged 21.1 points, 4.4 boards and 3.9 assists to be named the CBA's Rookie of the Year. There was a drastic difference between what people could achieve in the CBA level to then stepping it up. This is obviously pre-development league, NBA and whatnot. So to then come into league, he only played 4 games with the Bulls, and I think he played in the following season for another team. So he was out of the league that quickly, and yet he was a Rookie of the Year in the CBA. So that's a interesting one to contrast as well.
He did only play in 11 career games, but he actually holds the distinction of the only guy in NBA history to be floored by a Craig Elo screen, which happened during this game. He was also one of a few obscure names that appeared in the game. You had Johnny Morton, Charles Davis for the Bulls, Winston Cheesy Z or something, whatever you called him before, Bennett.
Cheesy Z? Cheesy Z. There's no relation to Junas Ilgauskas, is it?
It is. Cheesy Z, Big Z, same family. Okay. You had Clifford Lett, Derek Mischievous, who didn't get any playing time in this game, and the gentleman who has the moniker of the ugliest man in NBA history, Paul McKeskey, was also on the bench for the Cavs that game.
You went there. I can't believe that. Add silence. Given that you mentioned sheep earlier in the podcast, silence of the lambs.
You're a clown.
Apparently pre-game, this is only rumours, but apparently pre-game, McKeskey would walk around the paddocks out the side of Richfield Coliseum and the sheep would all go quiet. Anyhow, I'm just talking rubbish now.
Those listeners who are fans of Seinfeld would be well-versed in the term pigman, Jerry. Pigman. Pigman, Jerry.
That's right. So none of that will probably make it into the podcast.
Yes, it will. Oh, yes, it will.
You're right about that pick that Elo set. I'm pretty sure that Pippen was guarding Elo at the time, yet, no pun intended, didn't let know that there was a brutal pick coming his way, and he got absolutely poleaxed.
Yeah, and the grin on Scotty's face that the other camera zoomed in, very, very close shot. Hopefully that wasn't a grin from Scotty about the fact that Elo had just put Clifford Lett on his backside, but yeah, Scotty definitely dropped the ball on that one.
It was only seconds after that happened that they did show that close-up, so I think he actually might have been smirking about the fact that he didn't actually tell Lett that pick was coming. So who knows? It probably was to do with that.
You might like to say he let him get hit.
Oh, yeah. I effectively said the same thing about 30 seconds earlier.
Yes. Sorry.
Glad you're listening, mate. You must have been listening in the past because you referred to Derek Chivas as mischievous. So thank you for that at least. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Let's get into the third quarter antics, mate. The Bulls outscored the Cavs in that third quarter 36-28. So at that point, you'd think the game was almost broken open. Even at one stage in that third quarter, the Bulls were up by as many as 18 points. And then late in the quarter, Jordan sat for only a brief amount of time. And yet in that time, the Cavs came back. I think Elo hit a 3. John Morton hit a running layup at the buzzer and got it back to about an 11-point margin. But in this third quarter, Jordan still went insane on his scoring output. Had 20 for the quarter. Just an incredible amount of moves and quite an interesting quarter in terms of some of the things that happened. Jordan had his only dunk for the game too in this third quarter, so he beat everybody down court for the only dunk of the game for him.
It was quite an eventful quarter, as you mentioned. The other Cavs made a bit of a run late in the third quarter. At the 7:25 mark of the third quarter, Lenny Wilkins was actually ejected out of the game, which I'm sure that you'll remember as you watch the game in the last 24 hours.
He got teed up twice and was given the heave-ho. And then Dick Helm was the acting head coach. And I'm not exactly sure why Cleveland selected him to act in the place of Lenny Wilkins. He looked nothing like him.
That's a very good point. He actually has been, up until, I think, in the last 10 years or so, a long-time NBA assistant. And I think that he served most of his duration as an assistant under Lenny Wilkins at the numerous teams that he coached. But there was a bit of conjecture as to why Lenny got ejected. It may have actually been because of a call that he didn't agree with. He may have just been a bit upset and irate because of the fact that Jordan was treating his players like high school kids. And I actually personally think he was ejected because he traded Dominique a few years later.
So he was preemptively ejected by the referees.
That's correct.
And it was Dick Pavetta, too, that tossed him out of the game.
It was.
I think he said, Lenny, you better get out of here.
It was quite funny also how even in 1990, some 23 years ago, that Dick Pavetta still looked 85 years old and had no hair.
You are correct. That is an interesting comment there. Now, also of note, on the Cavs bench, did you notice that Brian Winters was also there?
Or Lurch, as is otherwise known as, one of the most unattractive men I've ever seen. That's not just an NBA thing either. He was he looked like a close relation of Lurch from the Addams family.
Wow. You've gone there with McKeskey, and now you've called Brian Winters one of the ugliest men alive. That's disappointing, mate.
Just calling it as I say it.
You are. I think Brian Winters would be quite grisly with that sort of comment. Some of the people listening might get that one. Jordan hit both of those technical foul shots after Wilkins was ejected from the game. And just prior to that, as was the case for most of his career, Jordan was on the receiving end of a few dubious calls in his favour. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back, or even the sheep's back in this case, would have been when Jordan continued to receive this favourable treatment from the refs. So I think Wilkins has had enough and he wanted to make a point. The crowd were just becoming increasingly irate in this third quarter, particularly as the Bulls went ahead by that 18-point margin at one stage as well. So
Dick was charged with taking the helm.
Yeah, that's right. Dick was at the helm, I guess, for the last he was at the helm for the last quarter and a bit and into OT as well. Elo stepped up his game in this third quarter. He was a lot more aggressive. He was taking charges. He was driving strong to the rack. He was a really great, energetic player for that Cleveland team, and I think he's another one of those really underrated players. A lot of people just think of him as Jordan's whipping boy, which is unfair, I believe. He had a really good career, Craig Elo. So after that third quarter, the Bulls were up 89-78, so they had an 11-point lead heading into that fourth quarter after outscoring the Cavs 36-28.
Yeah, the Cavs went on a very nice little run in the fourth quarter with a bit of a strange lineup. They had Larry Nance, Brett Doherty, and Hot Rod Williams all on the floor at the same time, which was a pretty huge front line. And you mentioned before about Elo. He was one of those guys that I think kind of maxed out his abilities and unquestionably at some point in time in the future would make a great guest on your pod. Hang on a minute.
As a future guest?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good idea. I've never actually thought about speaking with Craig Elo. He's got so many great links to Jordan that I'm surprised I haven't... actually, now you mention it, I have spoken to Craig Elo. So, shameless self-promotion, here we go. If you just quickly have a look at, if you were to go to inallairness.com/16, you'll be able to hear my interview with Craig Elo, and we do break down, obviously, his involvement with and playing against Jordan over the course of his career as well. And it's a pretty great chat, actually, to be honest. I'm tooting my own horn there, so thanks for the plug there, mate, and the check's in the mail. To start the fourth quarter as well, there was an interesting graphic that was displayed on the screen on the TNT broadcast. They put up a backcourt scoring comparison, and Jordan had 51, and Craig Elo and Mark Price had 45 combined. So that just showed you the kind of game that Jordan was having. You had to really just look at it a second and a third time before you fully understood.
Another graphic that TNT put up during the game, which dated the game, also was the other Cavs were coming up on the team record for the most three-pointers made in a season. And, of course, late 80s, early 90s is when the three-point shot was really coming into prevalence in the game. And, of course, now, it's a huge weapon in the game. And the graphic said that the 1988-89 New York Knicks had made 386 three-point field goals, which was the record at that time. And if you look at what happened just last year in the 2012-2013 season, Steph Curry set the NBA record for an individual and made 272 himself. So that shows how important the three-point shot is now compared to back in 1990.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I noticed that as well. We're only roughly 2 weeks into this current 2014 NBA season as we record this, and Steph Curry's already got about 168 threes already, so he's going to probably obliterate that again this coming season.
Yes, that is correct.
Slight exaggeration on my behalf, but still I think you see where I'm coming from. Early into the fourth quarter, the Cavs went on a bit of a mini run, but that was thwarted quite quickly by MJ with the shot clock running down. Just hit a dagger three-pointer as well, which just started to quiet the crowd just yet again, just when the Cavs were getting back into things as well.
That buzzer-beating three also you could hear the excitement in the voices of the commentators, Bob Neal and Doug Collins, as he hit that shot as well. That was just a perfect indicator as to how hot he was. The fourth quarter of that game, apart from MJ's highest ever career scoring game, also holds the record for the worst offensive foul call ever in NBA history. There was a play where Hot Rod Williams was on the break and John Paxson essentially ran sideways into his path and picked up the charge call on John Williams. It was the worst call one of the worst calls I've ever seen in a game. And by this time, the locals were getting restless. The Richfield crowd were going ape droppings.
They were, and even some of the sheep were rolled up in the paddock as well, so they weren't happy with things either. Now, I've also got, in my notes here as well, I've got Paxson takes a charge. Now, this is my total Bulls bias. I've got Paxson takes a charge on an out-of-control Hot Rod Williams.
Oh, really?
Yes. And I've got, it would have been Paxson's sixth foul. Crowd equals livid. That's what I've got in my notes.
I thought that the only way that Pax could have been moving any quicker sideways is if he had turned around and ran.
Oh, no doubt that he stepped in and he created the contact and was completely out of position. But I'm just saying my total Bulls bias was I've even reworded it so that that's an out of control hot rod is what I've written down. So that's just how silly I am, and I just can't get enough of that sort of stuff. So I've turned it around to make it look like Hot Rod Williams was the one who caused the contact.
As a fellow long-time Bulls fan, I'm actually jealous I didn't come up with that.
Yeah, well, I had to come up with some sort of word play, but out-of-control hot rod, I'll take that. That would have been, as you said, Paxson's sixth foul. He did foul out later in the quarter, but that would have been a crucial foul call had that actually gone against Johnny Pax.
Yeah, it was a call also that kind of arrested the slide that the Bulls were experiencing in that quarter too, because their offense in that last quarter was atrocious. And outside of MJ, we mentioned before how some of the younger fellas like Pippen and Grant looked tentative in the last quarter. The offense and turnovers as well really, really hampered the Bulls in that last quarter and gave the Cavs the opportunity to come back.
That's right. And also in this game, Stacey King had some decent minutes along with BJ Armstrong, both rookies. In this fourth quarter, Jordan continued to light it up. He came off a couple of staggered screens from Pippen and Cartwright, hit a wide-open jumper. That brought up his 56th point. Then later on, he'd also, on the left wing, hit a long two, 58. So he's obviously getting into, again, the heat check territory. To bring up his 60th point, he dribbled down the floor and then just hit a tough jumper. So a crazy array of shots that he just continued to hit. And other than Horace Grant, who scored 16 points, I think it was, the only other Bull in double figures, Jordan was a lone hand offensively. So he obviously continued with the scoring rampage as the quarter went on. Now, in the last couple of minutes, Paxson did pick up his sixth foul, and then BJ came on to replace him as well. So BJ came up with some big free throws later in the overtime period. We'll get to that shortly. Did you see where MJ went absolutely off at Bill Cartwright? A little bit less than 40 seconds to go, the Bulls turned the ball over, and MJ just gave Cartwright an absolute mouthful.
I did. MJ was also probably a bit aggro at the fact that he just thrown the ball away as well. But I think that he had a crack at Billy for not being in the right spot when the other Cavs were pressing them.
Late in that fourth quarter as well, when the Cavs were in the penalty, Jordan got another big defensive rebound. He got fouled. He made one of two free throws, and that brought up his 61 points. Just towards the end of the game as well, ELO hit a clutch three. He tied the game at 105 with just a monster three-pointer with about a little bit under 20 seconds left. So that was a huge moment as well.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, ELO had a bit of a rough game. Tried to start it off with his shooting and MJ abusing him, but he came through with the chocolates when it mattered most with that three-pointer. It was a clutch shot.
Yeah. With 11.3 seconds left, the Bulls had the ball. MJ was doubled before he even got to half court. He dribbled through that and then put up a desperation three, which hit the front rim and ended regulation. So we're headed to OT. So after the fourth quarter, the scores were tied at 105. That set up a very interesting overtime period, mate.
It was also at this point in time that I thought that MJ had started getting a bit of offensive help, and I thought that Horace Grant was starting to go off offensively. It was at this point in time I was having trouble deciphering between the two because Horace wasn't wearing his goggles at that point in time, and even though he was about 3 or 4 inches taller than Mike, had a very similar build and similar haircut. Maybe I should have been wearing my glasses too. So
I love the fact that you've called him Mike. He was Mike Jordan back in about 1982.
Yep.
Love it. That's great. That's a great job there, mate. I appreciate that. The overtime period, to start off with, Bob Neal made an interesting comment. If you listen back carefully, he says, now remember, John Stockton fouled out earlier. John Stockton? Didn't even know he was playing. It was John Paxson, I thought, but apparently Stockton had a few minutes earlier in the game and fouled out.
Yes, I was also going to make reference to that. I was going to say John Stockton, have you leave it in the pod and see if anyone up on it, but you beat me to the punch.
Sorry about that, mate. In the first 1.5 minutes of the extra session, there was no score, so it was obviously a tight overtime battle. And then MJ got the ball in the left wing, and this is where another eerily similar moment. Remember his record-breaking shot at Boston Garden in 1986? He does a very similar move to that, where he starts off on the left wing, drives into the key and hits on a short jumper. Very reminiscent of that same play to bring up also his 63rd point in Boston Garden.
It was very ironic that it was a very similar shot to match that scoring mark that he set in Boston. And I think it may have also been the only field goal that was scored in overtime as well. There was a truckload of free throws shot by both teams.
And then a bit later on in the overtime period, Jordan crept up on Hot Rod Williams, and in one of his classic defensive plays that he was renowned for his whole career, waited for the perfect moment to reach in and grab the steal as well. He just kept coming up with monster plays as the game progressed, so it wasn't just all his offensive output. He had a great game defensively as well. I think he had 4 steals for the game. And the overtime period is where, as you said, Doug Collins made that call about the Cavs possibly running a 4-screen play for Mark Price, and everything happened. You could see the screens all taking place, and they were counting them off as it happened.
Yeah,
they counted them off as it happened, and then unfortunately he missed the shot, but Doug Collins called the play to perfection. So you're spot on about how great of an analyst he was. He just knew some of the players they'd run with. It was a great moment as well.
No, you're right, mate.
A bit later in that OT period, Jordan got fouled on a drive to the hoop, and he hit 2 free throws, so that brought him up to 65 points. Again, he drew a foul on Winston Bennett, who's forever known now as Steady B, and he hit both again. So that brought him up to 67 points. Off the MJ miss, and the Cavs were down by just 1 point, they had a chance. Elo popped up a 3 that went over the backboard, so unfortunately it didn't stay in play, and then it became the Bulls' ball. So at that point, the game was virtually slipping out of reach, but that bounce didn't help their cause.
MJ picked himself up a superstar foul call on the previous one where he got fouled by Jeezy B, and it was very incidental contact, if any at all. But as you said, it gave Mike points number 64 and 65.
Gave Mike. I love it. On the subsequent inbounds, BJ Armstrong was fouled, and then he hit 2 clutch free throws to give the Bulls a 115 to 112 lead. And then Mark Price had a chance to still keep the game within reach, but uncharacteristically missed 1 of 2 free throws. He's a career 90.4% free throw shooter, but he came up short on 1 of those 2. Then the game sort of finished off. Horace Grant got fouled. He missed both free throws, but then Doug Collins, again, right on cue, called the offensive rebound for Jordan over Chucky Brown, and sure enough, it happened. MJ was fouled, hits both free throws, gets his 68th and 69th point, and that effectively was game over.
Yeah, with Mark Price missing that key free throw, as a 90% plus foul shooter, dare I say it, the price wasn't right.
Well played. And I think for the game, he was like 17 of 20 from the free throw line, Mark Price. So he had a fantastic game, and that's still 85%, which most players would take in a heartbeat. Hello, Dwight Howard. And unfortunately, he just missed at the wrong time, and that was the final chance that they really had. And unfortunately, it then led to the Bulls getting their remaining free throws, and Jordan ended up with 69 points. Now, it was good to see after the game as well, MJ and Elo shook hands when the game was over, and Jordan quickly disappeared off into the locker rooms. No on-court interviews or anything. So really just a fantastic game. Jordan's highest scoring output ever. At that time, it was the 9th highest scoring total in NBA history.
And it was a game that I think I only saw for the first time when I first got that Ultimate Jordan pack about 5 or 6 years ago. And what to say that I was excited to see that game was an understatement, almost as excited as I was just before when the hatred for Dwight Howard spilled into a podcast based on a 1990 NBA basketball game, which was very accurate and true.
Well, I don't know if I hate him, but he certainly has riled up a lot of players and a lot of fans and fan bases over the years, and I just thought I'd throw in a quick little jibe at him while I could, so for what it's worth. Also at that time, that was the 7th straight win on the road for Chicago, which was then tying a team record as well for 7 straight victories on the road. Really an incredible game. The Bulls ended up winning that match 117 to 113 in overtime. Just while I'm thinking of it, mate, can you actually hear through my microphone the sound of heaps of rain hitting the window at the moment?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. Just in case, at the moment, there's terrible weather outside, so if you can actually hear any sound effects in the background, that's just the rain going berserk outside. So the Bulls finished the regular season 55-27. That victory on this game actually clinched themselves a playoff berth as well. The Cavs finished just above 500 for the season. They were 42-40. And the Bulls won the season series against the Cavs 5-0. And Jordan's scoring output in those 5 games, he had a 54-point outburst on opening night, which was fantastic in Chicago Stadium. Then he scored 38-41 this 69-point game. And then he must have just taken the game off and had a lowly 22 points in the 5th game of the season series.
I think that he only played 1 quarter in that game, Adam.
That would explain it then. He just took it easy. And also, which I'm sure you'll revel in this stat, mate, Jordan eclipsed the season scoring high of Karl Malone, who previously had 61 points only a month or 2 earlier. Jordan, again, put Karl Malone lower in terms of the rankings of scoring output for that particular season.
That Bulls team and that Bulls game in particular, I think it was a pretty good indicator for that Bulls team. They had a lot of good role players, and they had a couple of young stars outside of MJ in Pippen and Horace. They weren't developed to the point where they really were going to be able to contribute to a Bulls championship team. And I say that in hindsight, the fact that the very next season they won the championship. But Jordan to have 69 in a game like that, which they only just won, was a pretty good indicator of the influence that he had to impose upon that team in order for them to win 55 games that year. It was only the following season, and in particular in the playoffs, is when you had a guy like Pippen start to emerge into one of the top 10 or 15 players of all time.
Agreed, mate. I'd just like to give a quick shout out at this stage to Sean Kemp, because at the moment, the rain, man, it's coming in at the moment, so hopefully you can't hear it through the microphones. The Bulls finished the season with the 3rd seed in the East. They were 55-27. They actually had a better record than Philadelphia, but because Philly won the Atlantic Division, that actually gave them the 2nd seed in the East behind the Pistons, who had the best record. So the Bulls ended up with 3rd seed, and then they'd go on to meet the Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals before losing out in that 7th and deciding game in Detroit. Meanwhile, the Cavs had the 7th seed, going 42-40, and they lost a first-round series. It was best of 5 back in those days. They lost to the 76ers, 3-2.
You mentioned before about Sean Kemp, the Rayman. I think it's a subliminal thing with you, Adam. You're a school teacher who handles lots and lots of children, and Sean Kemp has lots and lots of children as well, which is a reference that I'm sure you probably missed.
Oh, there had to be some kind of reference to Sean Kemp's offspring.
All 310 of them.
Apparently the NBA D-League, it mostly came about based on the fact that some of Sean Kemp's kids actually ended up playing, but I'm not sure if that's true or not.
Yeah, the actual percentage is 39% of the NBA D-League is populated by Kemps.
Oh, dear. In all seriousness, if that's possible, hello to Sean Kemp if you're listening. Unfortunately, I think he might be the latest person alienated from possibly chatting in the future, mate. We might have already done that.
It wouldn't feel right if I didn't alienate someone, and I've already thrown Pigman McKeskey under the bus and Grizzly Brian Winters. So, yeah, what's a third one?
Oh, boy, you've done well. I was wondering, actually, before we started recording, who could possibly be removed from the list of interviewees in the future, and, well, you've probably done well. You've stitched up at least 3 of them today, so thank you for that, and apologies to those guys if they happen to be listening at some stage in the future. In this game as well, Jordan made 23 field goals, and he only had the 1 dunk. Put on an absolute offensive display, hitting all kinds of jumpers, fadeaways, short pull-ups in the lane, driving layups. He just had the whole kit and caboodle on display. Mark Price had a fantastic game in the end. Overlooked was the fact he went 31 points and 8 assists. Craig Yellow had a beauty as well. He was 26 points in the end. Obviously, he didn't shoot the ball as well, but he was 26 points. He had 9 rebounds and 3 assists. And Hot Rod Williams also was a very handy player too. 23 points and 10 boards. And Brad Doherty just missed out on the double-double with 10 points and 9 boards.
Brad definitely had a bit of a quiet game offensively. Obviously, his timing and whatnot from his injury may have had an effect on that. But you saw Hydro Williams' stats from that game. He was actually averaging 16 points and about 9 rebounds a game. So he was having a pretty decent year that year.
Yeah, it definitely was, mate. That's for sure. And for the Bulls, as we said, Horace Grant was the only other Bull in double figures with 16 points. Pippen had one of the almost quietest triple-doubles in history had it actually have occurred. He had 7 points, 8 boards and 7 assists. As we said, you could just see his game was still developing to the point where it really reached the next level come 1991. Bill Cartwright had 9 points, 5 boards and 14 elbows.
I don't have the stats with me. How many points did John Paxson have?
I'm just looking at the box score at the moment. 2 points.
Johnny Paxson, I think up to that point in time, was struggling a bit with his shot. You heard them make reference to it once or twice during the game. I think the previous game, he'd had a pretty good shooting last quarter of the game before this one. But yeah, he finished with only 2 points and 17 dummy spits.
He did indeed. Now, for the season in that 89-90, just to get some context, he averaged 10 points a game, along with 4 assists and 1 steal. So clearly this game was not one of his better ones. He just finished with the 2 points, fouled out, had 2 turnovers and 1 assist in only 23 minutes of game time, and he just shot 1 of 4 from the field. So clearly he was not in rhythm that particular game because he was a key contributor to those Bulls teams throughout their build up to that 1991 championship season. This episode, mate, is the first in what will be probably many, if you're willing to be involved, greatest game recaps. Hope you've enjoyed it.
I guess now I have no choice, but undoubtedly looking at the other box set for Christmas coming up soon, I'll be sitting on the shelves right next to the ESPN 30 for 30 set, and actually quite enjoyed this today. I'm a diehard of the 80s and 90s NBA, as you are, mate, and I look forward to discussing more of the other great man's games from his career.
Totally agreed, and we won't just limit it to some of these great games that get included in the box sets. I'm sure with the advances of YouTube uploads over the previous years, we'll be able to access and just chat about many other games and moments that happened as well. Sound okay?
Yes, it does, and as ESPN use their original footage for their 30 for 30, we'll be stealing footage of other people in order to do ours.
That's right. It does help with our research, so that does give us plenty of discussion points. Now, what I might even do, mate, I might just try something on the spur of the moment here. Instead of actually ending the recording here, I might try and do a live to tape back announcing. Sound okay?
Yeah.
All right, so I might even get you to add your 5 cents in here, mate. Since the last episode, mate, there haven't been any additional reviews or iTunes ratings that have been added. You've added one, haven't you, mate? Hint, hint.
I believe I have, and I believe you're bringing this up as you're considering offering a prize to everyone who offers you a 5-star rating on the iTunes.
That is not true, but I would appreciate any ratings at all. If you do leave a review, I will mention your name in a future episode. I do like to talk about the ultimate assist, mate. Are you sick of hearing that line yet?
Yeah, I cringe. I mean, I enjoy it thoroughly every time I hear it. Every time I hear it, I have a bit of a chuckle to myself.
I've started actually changing it up a little bit and putting in people's names. I've mentioned Mark Jackson, and then I've also mentioned Magic Johnson. So who could we say would be the ultimate assist this time?
I think it's only fitting that we take the assist to Clifford Lett.
Clifford Lett. Okay, great. So your ratings and reviews are the ultimate Clifford Lett assist, which helped me reach a wider audience for the podcast. And that in turn gives you, the listener, more opportunity to hear conversations with great guests. So,
like me.
That's right, Aaron. Exactly right, mate. Now, you can subscribe to my show on iTunes if you haven't already, or you can simply add my RSS feed. Just check out the right-hand sidebar of my website. You can hear the show on Stitcher, Player FM, and other podcatchers, and it's also now on the Windows Zune Marketplace. If you can't find it on your platform of choice, just let me know and I'll try and make sure it is available. Just before we go, Aaron, thank you very much for being on the show again today. And is there anything you'd like to add before we sign off?
Adam, again, mate, it was my pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed being a part of your podcast, mate. Some of your previous ones with identities from the NBA in the 80s and 90s have been a must listen for anyone who enjoys the NBA of that period. And I look forward to hopefully contributing to more in the future, mate.
You certainly will be involved, mate. So thanks again for being along for the ride so far, and I've enjoyed it thoroughly.
Giddy up.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the show and share my web address with your friends and colleagues, inallairness.com. Check out the podcast archive for plenty more episodes with high-profile guests. Follow me on Twitter @inallairness. please add your like to the show's social hub, facebook.com/inallairness. Join me next time for another edition of the show.